Welcome back to The Fix with me, Karima Brown. Now it's time to take a look at our weekend newspapers with the Mail and Guardian's investigative journalist, Sabelo Skiti. Sabelo, thank you so much for joining me. Now, it's custom for us to obviously start with the front pages of the newspapers. We've just had the SABC board chair, Mr. Makatini, here talking about the soccer blackout for the SABC. This is obviously a very, very big story. The SABC is in trouble in terms of turning itself around. But Mr. Makatini was very emphatic. He was saying that they can't enter into arrangements with the PSL that doesn't make commercial sense for them. Do you support the SABC in this? Do you think the PSL is being unreasonable?
Look, I think we've got to appreciate the role that the SABC plays as a public broadcaster. And I do understand, his standpoint on, commercial viability. You've got to make sure that you're not constantly going to National Treasury asking for bailouts. A lot of SOEs at the moment are in trouble.
Yeah.
We would always be happy to have ones that don't come to us for a handout.
Yeah.
But that said, though, I'm a bit worried, I think, in terms of how do you then handle the content?
Yeah.
I think for me, that's the most important thing, because at what point do you then determine what is editorial and what is commercial when it comes to this
Sabelo,
sort of issue?
This is exactly what I asked Mr. Makatini. I said, is it just simply a commercial decision, or does it also require us to revisit legislation around this?
Yes.
Because, of course, one organization has a monopoly on this. I mean, e-news, for example, don't even bother because it's just too expensive. MultiChoice wrapped this up around their finger. Is it time to revisit this so that the nation can actually kind of watch these games, which is obviously of a huge public interest?
Look, I think it's crucial. I think it's gone beyond necessary. It's actually something that needs to happen with the utmost urgency before we actually find that the SABC is just basically a shell. For me, because, and I mean, as I'm saying, the difference between editorial and sort of commercial here, for instance, is what do we do, as they note, the Robert Marau sports show, for instance, the content there, a lot of it has more editorial value than commercial value.
Right.
Although, obviously the brand managers and stuff would say, well, it's nice to have that specific player being interviewed, but actually the editorial value that it places is actually higher than the commercial value. So I think this is where we then need to become cognizant of that and actually then have legislation that speaks to that and allows the playing field to be much more even. What's going to happen next? Are they going to say we can't even give us the scores, for instance, during news bulletins?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, one of the other stories that caught my attention is a story on the news politics page, which says top lawyers take on the protector. And it says here Mr. Tembeka Ngugaitobi and Mr. Wim Trengrove is going to be acting for the president. And they are essentially saying that the public protector needs to explain how she acquired information on the CR17 campaign, because the bank certainly didn't cooperate with her, and they're suggesting that she might have gotten them illegally. Now, one can't obviously enforce the law, break the law to enforce the law. What do you make of the importance of this? Is this an attempt by the president to run away from accountability because they're asking, for example, for the accounts to be sealed? Or do you think that the public protector actually has a case to answer for in terms of how she got hold of this, especially if one also considers that ABSA went on the record to say that they didn't give the public protector information with regard specifically to the CR17 campaign?
They were never subpoenaed. So I think for me, Karima, this then, you need to sort of break it up into two. I think the first one is basically how do you conduct an investigation? What's fair and what's not fair in terms of whistleblower stuff that you get and stuff that gets leaked to you.
Yeah.
I'll get to that last, but I think the most important thing is to deal with sort of trying to understand the president's mindset here. A lot of us will probably remember in the run-up to Nasrec, the president, there was a story that came out in the independent newspaper.
Oh, the cupcake story.
About cupcake, yes. So, and basically what we got to learn from that was that somehow the president's emails had become compromised, and then
he was the deputy president at that time. So the deputy president of South Africa's email was not secured.
And then I also then say, so that happens. And then last week you get a very sort of out of left field story on News 24 Online, which, are basically emails that uncover what was happening within the CR17 campaign, basically showing that the president might have had some knowledge about who some of these donors were.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the time frame of those emails,
yes,
and you look at the time frame of the emails around the cupcake situation, it sort of shows you that there was a stage where there was a time where the deputy president of the country was compromised.
Yes, so from a security point of view. Now, obviously, we live in an age where nothing is really private. I mean, companies go through the emails of their workers. We've seen situations where people use incredible software to kind of, influence outcomes and stuff like that. But in a context in South Africa, particularly in the governing party, where conspiracy and spying and hacking is kind of all part of the tricks that people have used to access power and position, what does it say about the African National Congress that one of the 7 candidates in that fight for the presidency of the African National Congress has had his account hacked? Because nobody else's funding sources have been revealed. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, Jeff Radebe, Lindiwe Sisulu, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, among others. What do you think this is about? What is the underlying kind of motive here? Is it to show that Mr. Ramaphosa had bought the presidency? Was he specifically targeted around this?
I think, my view, is that there was always a consensus, within even those that were pushing, the NTZ agenda, for instance, that it's going to be a very tall order for them to actually come through. I think they knew that the tide was turning within the country and within the ANC. So they then knew that at any stage they needed to have any dirt on, the current president, Cyril Ramaphosa. And for me, it speaks to sort of, the patronage networks. Because I think for me, that's where the value is, or rather that's what leads to the demise of the ANC. It's the fact that people have invested so much.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask you to just turn the page in front of you so that we can have a look at the City Press's front page. And they, of course, talking about the state to crack down. And this is on immigration. We've seen 400 foreign nationals being arrested, counterfeit goods being taken, and some ammunition also being taken. Some people have questioned the undertones of these investigations. No one is saying that counterfeit goods shouldn't be cracked down on and undocumented people shouldn't, be questioned. But there seems to be a tinge of xenophobia, certainly, behind the way in which these investigations have been conducted. Considering that in 1928 we had pogroms where people were burnt alive, do you think that that's justified?
Look, I think we ought to be worried about the sort of language that is coming out of our political leadership around this issue. And I don't know whether it's because they're embarrassed about what happened in the CBD in the last week, or whether it's informed by a lack of clear understanding and a lot of clear policy around, the movement of people in the African continent. I don't think anyone would ever argue, for instance, that South Africans must be made to live with people that are undocumented in their areas. But if you look at that, even that is a failure to actually police our borders properly. It's a failure to implement the laws that we do currently have, because we do have laws that are quite fair that deal with these situations.
People have also said that it's a particular attack on foreign Africans, because people were saying, when last have you heard about a raid at China City? When last have we cracked down on counterfeit goods coming in from places like India or places like China? And of course South Africa is part of BRICS, and many people say, well, the Chinese have a way of kind of massaging their way out of this. Is that a fair criticism in your view?
I think it's very fair, and I think and I think this is what I was sort of getting to when I was saying the language is very worrying. There's a tinge of populism in it. It's not informed by any real sort of thought that we see behind it. There definitely is, I think, a role to be able to say that this thing actually seems to be targeting, African immigrants in the country. And the way that they are speaking and going about it is what actually incites the scenes that we remember from 2008, and I mean, not too long ago.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the whole question of people coming from former Eastern European countries, many of them involved in major crime and drug syndicates, for example. And, of course, they are able to pay policemen off. We've seen it in affidavits and so on. So why do you think Minister Cele is buying into the narrative of Mayor Herman Mashaba that it's foreign Africans that are the problem and not illegal immigrants from everywhere in the world that are bringing in goods that are either counterfeit or illegal goods, such as drugs, guns, and other things?
No, I think for me, I think it's an attempt, really, to sort of paper over.
Yeah.
The fact that they've surrendered, and I mean, they've surrendered the East Rand of Johannesburg, basically,
yeah.
To the underworld, and they've got pockets and syndicates that they can't even get an understanding of how these things operate, because these guys pay, and when these
but they would also have to scratch in the police, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
They pay right to the very top, whereas, in Hillbrow, for instance, it would probably be up to the level of station commander, if even that.
So it's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, so it's easier to go in there and, kick down doors and push people around. But they know that, when they get to the upper echelons of society, that's when they become implicated in some of these activities.
Absolutely, and there's, of course, questions that we must continue to ask. What story in the Sunday World caught your eye this morning?
I think the story that stood out to me, Karima, is a story that's on page 4. It basically talks about the public protector yet again. The latest judgment that we heard in the courts on Thursday, and how this might play out within the ANC caucus in Parliament. The fact that a whole lot more pro-Cyril MPs are now looking forward to actually getting this thing heard before the Portfolio Committee and actually backing what the opposition is asking for here. It's very interesting for me because the headline sort of says knives out for public protector, as if, she's, under some sort of attack or she's being backstabbed, when really, I mean, the reality is that the public protector has not lived up to the office.
If you say she's not lived up to the office, I mean, the EFF has said that the judges are racist, and that's the other thing I wanted to ask you. It's in none of the newspapers, but on Women's Day, the leader of the EFF launched a scathing attack on judges. Now, we know that they called the first judge racist because she was white. The second judge, who was a black female, they said she couldn't read. They questioned whether it was her own judgment. So they just attacked women. But now they're threatening to go to the bush to take up arms until there are new judges. How seriously should we take this? And this is all, of course, related to the public protector.
Look, I think, literally speaking, we don't have to worry about the EFF going to the bush. I think there is no... I don't think there's even the willpower within them. I don't even think they understand what it means to go to the bush. But
so it's trash talking, essentially.
What we ought to be worried about is
Sabelo,
actually what happens when they talk like this.
Absolutely. We've run out of time. Thank you so very much, Sabelo, for joining us. Well, that's your fix for this week. Take care. See you again next week.